And Democratic Congressman Khanna of California into our conversation. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to treat this like we treat gaggles on Capitol Hill. There are a whole bunch of topics that I want to get to with you, but I want to start there on the Guatemalan children, the fact that they cannot be deported for at least 14 days, and what you think the Trump administration is trying to do here as they're sending those kids back to Guatemala.
Well, they're violating the law. I mean, the reality is you can't just deport people wherever you want. There's due process. And what's sad about it is it's children. Look, the American people wanted secure borders. They did not want mass deportation of children or people here who are paying taxes and working hard. And the administration is just overreaching in a lawless way.
So as you call that an example of overreach, I think it's a connector to what we're potentially looking for in Chicago. As you have the Illinois governor there warning about the deployment of National Guard troops against his wishes. You see the mayor there, Brandon Johnson, trying to shore up basically his own law enforcement agencies there on the ground to try to make sure of what they can and can't do if Trump actually deploys troops. What do you make of the fact that they're having to do preemptive measures, basically, to take protections over potential federal overreach?
It's scary. And we didn't fight a revolution in this country to have militarized streets. And if Donald Trump really wanted to fight crime in cities, he should have run for mayor, not president of the United States. While he's pulling these antics, consumer confidence is down. Manufacturing is down. Farms are closing. The unemployment rate for recent college graduates is spiking to 12%. It's a failed economic record. And all he's doing is trying to militarize our streets. How about he care about our economy? I have a plan called New Economic Patriotism. How about he try to bring peace to Ukraine and peace in Gaza? He's not doing his job, and all his focus is these cities. Well, he ran for the wrong job.
Have your colleagues in the Illinois delegation given any sense of what could be helpful from Congress in terms of action if the Trump administration actually does deploy troops there?
Well, first of all, it's illegal. How about our Supreme Court step up? How about our court systems step up? This is not a case of we need to pass new laws. And secondly, the president's doing this coincidentally only where you have Republican with Democratic governors. What about Memphis with the highest crime rate, or St. Louis, which has a very high crime rate? Why is he not ever targeting them? Because they have Republican governors. So it is a politicization of the application of the military. And the Supreme Court and our courts should be striking this down as unconstitutional. Of course, Congress will continue to speak up. And I admire Governor Pritzker, Governor Moore, Governor Newsom, and others who have been standing up for our Constitution.
Do you share Pritzker's fear about the ulterior motive around 2026, Trump potentially trying to stop the midterm elections?
He's not going to stop the elections. Of course, we have to be vigilant and we need to be out there. But look, I grew up the son of immigrants. I remember my dad and mom in Bucks County going to polling places, and they were my dad was the local Northampton Township chair, and he'd stand there with Republicans and they'd celebrate democracy. Democracy is in our DNA. Donald Trump is delusional if he thinks he can strip that out. But we as citizens need to be vigilant and be out there volunteering, protecting elections. But we also need to offer an alternative to what Trump is doing. The way to defeat Trumpism is to have an economic vision, as a positive vision for this country, to show he has failed and to show what we will do, and to have such a surge at the polls that it will not matter what type of antics he tries.
You tee me up well on the economics, because one of the hallmarks of Trump's economic agenda has been tariffs, and that trade agenda has been dealt a significant setback in the recent days. A federal appeals court ruled on Friday that most of his tariffs are actually illegal, upholding a lower court's finding that Trump overstepped his authority when he leaned on an Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose those sweeping levies on virtually every country in the world. It was a 7-4 decision where the court wrote in part, quote, "It seems unlikely that Congress intended to grant the president unlimited authority to impose tariffs. The tariffs, though, will remain in place through mid-October. However, that gives the Trump administration time to file an appeal with the Supreme Court." The president, of course, took to social media over the weekend to rail against this ruling and to preview an appeal, writing that he expects his tariffs will benefit the country with the help of the Supreme Court. So we're playing a little bit of a legal waiting game, as we so often are here, Congressman. But you've pushed for things like repealing the coffee tariff. You've said that Congress should make moves to repeal these tariffs. It seems unlikely, but it does also feel like people are probably feeling pressure at home from constituents who, at best, are confused about what the impact of tariffs are going to be, and at worst, are already feeling the crunch.
Well, this is not complex legal matter. This is basic economics. Look, like many Americans who watch this, I'm drinking my coffee. Coffee is up for every American, 10 to 20%. We only make 1% of coffee in the United States. Almost all of it comes from Brazil, from Vietnam. Why would we have a 50% tariff on coffee? You know what else is up in America? If you want to get a hamburger, you know why that's up over 10%? It's because we have had tariffs on Brazil, on Mexico, and in terms of getting cattle and beef here. And by the way, we're hurting our ranchers because we've driven their costs up. And then you look at the inflation, it's up over 3%. And how's the president handling it? Instead of doing the obvious, which every economist, conservative and liberal, is telling him, don't have blanket tariffs, he says, well, let me just fire people at the Fed. Guess what, Mr. President? There's a simple way if you want the Fed to cut interest rates. The way to do it is to repeal your policies of blanket tariffs, to repeal your policies of mass deportation of people who are here paying taxes, to repeal your policies of attacking universities and scientific research. You are creating a situation worse than what Nixon did. It's like he's trying to take a good economy and push us into stagflation. It's a failed economic record, and that's what every Democrat needs to be saying around this country. We have the right vision to put more money in working class people's pockets, to raise wages, to create jobs, to grow this economy, to bring America back.
And in fact, one of the reasons that the Fed has said they've been leaving rates where they are for now is because of the economic uncertainty of things like tariffs, as they wait to see what the actual impact of those policies are. You know, I'm a morning show host. I would love coffee to be as cheap as it possibly could be. But I also want to pivot here, too, Congressman, to where you've also been focusing a lot of your attention, which is on the Epstein files. It comes as the top Democrat on the House committee that's investigating that case says that the estate of the deceased sex offender will hand over a so-called birthday book to the committee. This move comes following a subpoena from the Republican-led House Oversight Committee, which was issued last week as part of its ongoing investigation. This is all according to Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California, who was interviewed here on MSNBC. Of course, this leather-bound book was compiled by convicted Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell and contains personal notes for Epstein's 50th birthday back in 2003. It also reportedly includes an explicit birthday message from Donald Trump. But Trump has said that this message is fake and that he never wrote it. Of course, the Wall Street Journal has reported on it. Representatives for Epstein's estate did not immediately respond to a request for comment. But additionally, Congressman Garcia says many of Epstein's victims will come to Capitol Hill later this week to meet with lawmakers to, quote, highlight their stories. And then, of course, tomorrow, the House intends to resume plans for a resolution that you are a big part of to compel the Justice Department to release the Epstein files. That'll, of course, happen when Congress reconvenes. You know, you come back and I think these two things happen. You've got the Epstein survivors press conference, which is going to be, I imagine, emotional and compelling. And then you also have the policy method of the discharge petition. You talk about how you've got all 212 Democrats on board, that your bipartisan colleague, Thomas Massie, brings about 12 Republicans to this. Do you have a sense from the Republicans that are inclined to put their name on this discharge petition that leadership is talking to them, saying, won't you please wait? I mean, this really does put them between a political rock and a hard place with the White House.
Leadership in White House is not just talking to them. They're trying to intimidate them. I mean, Thomas Massie has $20 million of super PAC money that is being spent against him. But this is a matter of principle, and this is a matter of standing with the victims for justice. The victims have not had a chance to speak about this for years. It predates Donald Trump. They were swept under the rug. When Epstein was first sentenced, their lawyer was not consulted. When Maxwell was sentenced, their lawyer was not consulted. This is the first time that 10 victims are coming to the steps of the Capitol to tell their story. And all that matters is what they want. And they're going to say they want the full release of the Epstein files. Massey and I believe that after their testimony, after every American hears from them, that it will be very hard for anyone to not sign that discharge petition. There are 12 Republicans. I admire their independence, and I'm quite confident that we are going to get the vast majority of them to sign, and maybe some others. This is about making sure rich and powerful men don't have a separate system of justice in this country, and it's about fundamental transparency and trust in government.
And I will be there with you for that press conference. I think it's going to be compelling and powerful. Certainly sets the tone for the way that this Congress is going to come back in session. I have a question, though, on the oversight depositions front. We saw people like Bill Barr testify behind closed doors during the recess. Other than Alex Acosta, who is set for a little bit later in September, do you anticipate any other depositions before the Oversight Committee in the next few weeks?
Chairman Comer is working on getting other depositions set, both of people who possibly are accused in the Epstein files, Republicans, Democrats, others, and people at the Justice Department who were involved. I appreciate that he did subpoena the birthday book. As you know, that actually happened because of Lawrence O'Donnell. I was on Lawrence O'Donnell. Lawrence O'Donnell had Bradley Edwards on his show right before me. And Bradley Edwards, the victim's lawyer, says, you know what you guys should do on the Oversight Committee is subpoena this birthday book. And so I led a letter with Ranking Member Garcia to the Epstein lawyers because of Lawrence O'Donnell's reporting. And then Comer, to his credit, followed up with a subpoena, and we're going to get the birthday book. But that shows that it's going to take all of us in this country to push for transparency, to help stand up for these victims.
Yeah, and Edwards basically said in that interview, if you ask the Epstein estate, I really have a hard time believing that they're going to say no, really signaling to you guys, hey, this is one of the threads that you should be following. I think the other thread that I'm following as you all come back to town is the funding fight that is brewing for the end of September. The government shutdown, of course, last time there was a lot of consternation between the Senate and the House. House Democrats told me that they sort of felt hung out to dry by Senate Democrats in the way that that ultimately ended up avoiding a shutdown. What are the lessons that you guys are going to put in play? I know that many of you look at this as a leverage point. Has the caucus already huddled and discussed a strategy?
We have. We're going to fight. We're going to stand up for our principle. Well, it looks like not withholding our votes until we get basic concessions. And you say, what are those basic concessions? Follow the law. Don't militarize our streets. Don't engage in the cuts to agencies like the Department of Education, USAID, NIH, NSF, which aren't authorized by Congress. You have an administration that doesn't care what budget we're passing. What's the point of passing a budget if they're just going to make these cuts anyway? What's the point of passing a budget for the CDC for vaccine implementation when you have a Secretary of the Health and Human Services who's got edicts saying, we don't believe in science. We don't believe in mRNA. Can you believe that? It's nothing to do with COVID. They're blocking cancer vaccines that have mRNA. So this Congress has to stand up and say, we're not going to be a blank check. You need to follow the Constitution. We're Article 1. The president is Article 2. Somehow no one remembers that. And this is about the pride of self-government in Congress. So we are not going to have the Schumer dance this time of just surrender. We are going to stand up for the American people. Our base demands that.
It is going to be very busy when you guys start coming back to town tomorrow. Democratic Congressman Khanna of California. I'll see you there. Thank you.